It was a quiet night in Pripyat until it wasn't. What if I told you that the most catastrophic nuclear disaster in history was caused by a single safety test gone horribly wrong? Welcome to Midnight Oil, where we dig into history's darkest moments under the dim light of truth. I'm Tab.
And I'm Keegan. Tonight, we're taking you into the radioactive heart of the Chernobyl disaster, what led to it, the chaos during the meltdown, and the haunting aftermath. Stay tuned because this story will leave you glowing, but not in a good way.
Oh man. Yeah, so this one's a doozy. Compared to our midweek 3 Mile Island, nobody died, but this one, people were dying off immediately after it happened.
Bum bum bum!
But yeah, so let me set the scene for you real quick. To understand Chernobyl, we need to understand its place in history. The plant was built in 1970s as part of the Soviet Union's push for nuclear power. It was a symbol of Soviet technological prowess, located near Pripyat, a city built to house the workers and their families. Pripyat wasn't just a town, though. It was a shining example of Soviet ambition. So if you picture this, freshly painted apartment buildings, schools, a hospital, shops, and even an amusement park was there. And that was set to open just days after the disaster. So it was really the USSR's model city. It was full of young families living the dream. So the Chernobyl plant used the RBMK reactors. They were powerful and cost effective, but they had a catch. There was a major design flaw, like a tendency to become unstable at low power. These flaws were known, but largely ignored, hidden behind layers of bureaucracy and political pressure to keep costs low. The culture of secrecy in the USSR, admitting a problem wasn't just embarrassing for them, but it was like dangerous for your career, or maybe even worse, because they were known to like assassinate people, I think. I could be like totally wrong about that, but so when the safety concerns were raised, they were often just swept under the rug. And here's where we get into the actual disaster. So, as I was reading earlier, there was a safety test that was scheduled to basically simulate like a power outage, and it was scheduled to be performed earlier in the day during the day shift. And they had already prepared to perform it and all of that stuff. But due to, I think it was a coal plant that actually did lose power nearby, they had to keep it running because they couldn't just leave people without power. So the safety test was moved towards the night shift, and the night shift was not prepared to run this at all. So here's where we get into the hour by hour breakdown. April 25th, 1986. These are the pre explosion events. At 1 p.m., Reactor 4 was scheduled for a safety test. The test was overseen by Anatoly Dyatlov, the deputy chief engineer who had a reputation for being strict and dismissive of safety concerns. At 4 p.m., reactor operators, including Leonid Toptunov, which was a reactor control engineer, and Alexander Akimov, he was a shift supervisor. They began reducing the reactor's power. So, like I said, the test was delayed for several hours due to the unexpected power demand. At 11:10 p.m., the delay meant the reactor remained in a precarious state for an extended period. Dyatlov insisted on continuing the test despite these risks, overriding concerns for Akimov and the other staff. 11:25 p.m., safety systems, including the emergency core cooling system, were deliberately disabled under Dyatlov's orders to prevent them from interrupting the test. This decision violated a lot of safety protocols. And so now
No,
we
no
get
kidding.
to, yeah, for real. So now we get to April 26th, 1986. This is leading up to the explosion. 12:28 a.m. Reactor power unexpectedly dropped to 30 MW. I want to say that's megawatts. I could be wrong though.
I think you're right.
Which is either way, the 30 MW, that's an unsafe level due to operator error. Leonid Toptonov, a relatively inexperienced engineer, attempted to recover power but struggled due to the excess of xenon gas poisoning in the reactor core. Which, if you know anything about xenon gas and nuclear reactors, that's kind of bad. 1 a.m., power stabilized at 200 MW, megawatts, potentially, but the reactor was in an unstable state. Nearly all of the control rods were withdrawn, a dangerous move approved by Dyatlov, despite objections from Akimov. Now here's where we start the test. 1:23 a.m. The test began. Operators reduced steam to the turbine, simulating a power outage. This caused the coolant to rapidly heat up in the reactor core. 1:23, but like a few seconds later, recognizing instability, Alexander Akimov ordered the AZ5 button to be pressed to initiate an emergency shutdown, which that was like the scram button. And I'm pretty sure, if I'm recalling correctly, when you hit that, I think that means all of the control rods get inserted, which when the control rods get inserted to the reactor, that's supposed to, I think, reduce the power. But either way, inserting the control rods was supposed to stabilize the reactor.
Supposed to.
Supposed to.
This obviously did not happen.
Yeah. So this action was carried out by Toptonov. However, the control rods had graphite tips, which, part two of if you know anything about nuclear reactors, that's bad. Because the graphite initially going into the reactor causes a spike. So all of them going in at once, that's a lot of spikes. Like, let's be real. But instead of the control rods trying to, halt the reaction, it increased reactivity because of those graphite tips. Anyways, a few seconds later, it's still 1:23, so all of this happened like really fast. A massive power spike occurred, with the reactor output surging to 30,000 MW, which is 10 times the maximum amount. This led to a catastrophic failure of the fuel rods and the core. Another few seconds later, the explosion destroyed the reactor vessel, and a second explosion followed moments later, likely from hydrogen gas buildup. The reactor's 1,000-ton lid was ejected, exposing the core to the atmosphere. And so
Oh my
that's just
gosh.
the explosion. Like, that's crazy. But continuing on the time frame. So 1:24 to 2 a.m., fires broke out on the roof and inside the reactor building. They called up firefighters led by Lieutenant Vladimir Pravik. They responded immediately, but they were unaware of the radiation hazard. Pravik and his team received fatal doses of radiation while extinguishing the flames. 2:15 a.m. Operators, including Akimov and Toptonov, worked desperately to pump water into the destroyed reactor, still believing it was intact. Both of those men were exposed to lethal levels of radiation during their efforts. At 3 a.m., the plant director Viktor Bryukhanov and chief engineer Nikolai Fomin were informed of the explosion. Both of them downplayed the severity of the incident, even as workers and first responders started exhibiting symptoms of acute radiation poisoning. So, like, that alone is crazy as fuck. And, like, we're not even diving into the super acute details of all of these things. These are just like brief overviews of what happened hour by hour. Because I know that once they knew something had gone wrong and they tried to hit the scram button, the operators, it was either Akimov or Toptonov, they went to go find Dyatlov, which was the chief engineer, and they were like, hey, uh, something's wrong. And Dyatlov was like, oh, no, like, it's, go look at it, like, you don't really know what's going on. And a bunch of the people, like, went up, they had to go up above it to look down at it, and they were like, yo, something is for sure wrong. And there were times where, again, it was either Akimov or Toptomov. They were walking through the hallways and they saw like people literally in the hallways, like dying from all of the
That's
radiation.
terrifying.
Yeah, yeah.
So they're like they're not like melting, but they're like almost,
Their skin is burning off, I think.
yeah, they're like combusting.
Yeah.
That's terrifying.
But yeah, anyways. Now it's 4 a.m. The radiation detectors that they had on site at the time, because they didn't have super powerful ones actually located at the plant, they were maxing out at 3.6 roentgens per hour. The upper limit of the devices was 3.6. So it was maxed out. And they were like, okay, well, we know it's bad, but we don't really know how bad it is because we don't have a powerful enough radiation detector to figure out what it's actually measuring at. But the actual levels near the reactor were later estimated at 20,000 roentgens per hour. That's enough to deliver a lethal dose in minutes. That's insane.
That's literally terrifying.
Yeah.
Could you imagine? Oh my gosh. That's terrible. I can't imagine my flesh being radiated off.
No, yeah. But it's like, oh, well, we know it's maxing out at 3.6, but what if it's only like 10? No, it was 20,000. The fact that they didn't know because they didn't have a. That's. Oh my god. Anyways, moving on. 5 a.m. Operators, still unaware of the full extent of the damage, sent personnel to inspect the reactor. Valery Kodymchuk, a pump operator, was killed instantly during the explosion, and his body was never recovered. Others who
Wow.
ventured close to the reactor suffered fatal radiation burns.
Fatal
So,
meaning they died.
yeah, very that. At
Oh
6
dear.
a.m., reports of radiation sickness symptoms, vomiting, severe headaches, burns, began to spread among the workers and firefighters. So this is progressing like really fast. The fact that it all started at like 1 p.m. I can't imagine
Yeah.
waking up like to my alarm, like, oh, time to go into work. Oh, it looks like my work exploded and I'm in danger.
Now I'm green.
Yeah.
That's terrifying. Could you imagine just going to work one day and then, you're having lunch. It's your lunch break, 1 p.m., 2 p.m. You're just eating your sandwich. It starts glowing green and you're like, "Huh, that's weird." And it starts like floating in front of your face.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, "Oh, this is very strange. I have no idea what's going on." And then you spontaneously like combust and your skin starts setting itself on fire.
Yeah. That'd be some crazy shit. Yeah. At 7 a.m., the plant managers, including Bryukhanov, failed to notify higher authorities about the full scale of the disaster. By this time, radioactive particles were spreading across Europe. 12 p.m., Soviet officials, now aware of the potential consequences, began discussing evacuation plans. However, they did not inform the public, and radiation levels in Pripyat continued to rise. So, Soviet officials didn't even know until 12 p.m. when the explosion happened at like 1 p.m. or 1 a.m.
So it's like 12 hours,
Yeah,
basically.
roughly.
Imagine just an entire landscape changing in 12 hours.
That would be actually insane.
So there's a bunch of conspiracy theories that I'll jump into, but after you're done with the timeline. But just one to think about is there was this conspiracy that extraterrestrials were intervening during or after the explosion to mitigate effects. I thought it was an angel or a ghost, but apparently it's widely spread to be known as alien involvement. There were a bunch of witnesses reporting seeing UFOs or strange lights over the sky of Chernobyl during the disaster, and they suggest that aliens reduced radiation levels or prevented even further damage. But basically, there were just a bunch of random sightings that could be attributed to like stress and fear or any different atmospheric phenomena that was happening because radioactivity going on. So people probably weren't super locked in on what they were seeing. They were probably freaking out a bit.
I'll be so real. It was most likely the radiation because in a video that I watched about it, it was talking about how there was quite literally like a beam of light shooting out of the core, and it was just like a reaction between like radiation just like going up into the atmosphere.
Just just going whoop up.
Yeah. And it literally looked like a beam of light. That's
That's
insane.
so terrifying. It's like they lit a nether beacon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So 2 p.m. helicopters began dumping sand, boron, clay, and lead onto the exposed reactor core to extinguish the fires and reduce radioactive emissions. These efforts were directed by General Nikolai Barakhanov, who oversaw the cleanup operations. He also had a partner, or like some guy that stepped in and was like, hey, look, I know a lot about this. I can help you with this. And I can't remember his name off the top of my head at the moment, but just know I'm not forgetting about him. And then the next day at 2 a.m., the radiation levels in Pripyat reached life threatening levels. Still, no public evacuation order was given. At 11 a.m., finally, an evacuation order was issued. Pripyat's 49,000 residents were told to pack essentials and leave, with no indication that they would ever return. Throughout the next day, Soviet officials mobilized military and scientific personnel, including liquidators, tasked with cleaning up the site. Workers, known as biorobots, were sent to manually clear radioactive debris from the reactor roof, often with little to no protective gear. And so that's the timeline of how everything went down, kind of just like brief overviews.
And you can go there today.
Yeah.
Not like actually like inside, but like close. You were talking about different like tours that you could take,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, that's absolutely off the walls, bonkers. I have an issue like drinking out of like a water bottle that I opened that was out of my sight for like 2 seconds because I'm just super anxious. I couldn't imagine doing a tour of Chernobyl.
Yeah.
I think I would still like to, but like isn't that crazy that you can just do that? Like that's a thing that humans can do is visit a radioactive wasteland
Yeah, I think that's insane. Yeah, you can go tour the zone, apparently.
without a suit. No
Yeah.
suit.
It's
I
closed,
want.
though, right
Oh,
now.
they have to get out some of the radioactivity. It's like it's it's like a haunted house. It's only open seasonally, so they can pump it so it's not too dangerous.
I think that's insane. Like, a whole town
Okay.
just had to get up and go.
Yeah. Okay. So, right. Imagine you've painted the picture. There's a nuclear meltdown. You live in this town, pretty close to the reactor. Ring, 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 ring. Hello, Tab. We have a nuclear reactor melting down currently, and you need to evacuate the area. And your home will probably not be livable for the next 3,000 years. So just take a couple things and yeah, have a good life. Click.
Bro, what the fuck?
like like what do? You can't save your house? Like, you better have insurance. I don't know if there's radioactivity insurance, but you better have it.
Literally, yeah. No, I think it was announced over like intercoms? Question mark.
No.
Like you know how we have like tornado sirens?
Yeah.
It was announced over like that. So it was broadcast to the whole city over and over like, "Hey, please evacuate, gather important belongings." And it was just repeating that over and over.
Holy.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to imagine like what it would feel like to be radiated. It sounds
Bad.
just absolutely terrible. Like that sounds actually I don't like the way like suffocation sounds terrible of like either being underwater like drowning or just not being able to breathe. Those are probably like my least favorable ways to go out. Up
Mhm.
there now is being radiated instantaneously
Yeah.
with enough radiation that my skin begins to catch on fire and I'm burnt into a crisp and my fucking shadow is burnt onto the pavement and grass. Like
Mhm.
I that sounds just actually awful. It's almost like getting Thanos snapped. You
Yeah.
existed and now you don't, and that's just terrifying.
Mhm. Okay, I found the thing about the announcement. So at 11 a.m. on April 27th, which was 36 hours after the whole thing happened, local authorities announced over loudspeakers that Pripyat's 49,000 residents would need to leave their homes temporarily. The official line was that this was a precautionary measure due to an accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Residents were told that they would be allowed to return in a few days. This false assurance was meant to prevent panic and minimize the amount of belongings taken. Most residents left with only a few personal items, leaving behind their homes, pets, and valuables. The evacuation was carried out primarily using a fleet of over 1,200 buses. These were organized by Soviet officials and arrived in Pripyat in the morning. Residents were assigned specific pickup locations. What residents were told to bring: personal identification documents, essential items like clothing and food for a couple of days. No large belongings were allowed to minimize evacuation time. To
Wow.
maintain order, residents were evacuated street by street, and military and local officials oversaw the process. The evacuation lasted approximately 3 hours, starting at 2 p.m. and concluding by the late afternoon.
So I found a picture of a woman holding a pig that was a victim of the radioactive fallout, and it's terrifying. It looks like it actually looks like something that you would see out of like a comic book or a movie after like a radiation spills into like a river.
Oh, good lord. Yeah, I see that.
Yeah, that's terrifying.
It's crazy. And another interesting fact, so the initial survival of the pets that were left behind, the animals roamed the abandoned streets and homes of Pripyat, scavenging for food and water. Many succumbed quickly to radiation exposure, starvation, or the absence of their caretakers. Some pets, especially dogs, were seen waiting at doorsteps or wandering the streets, likely searching for their owners. Once the soldiers and cleanup workers got moved in, and started to take care of the explosion, they were tasked with euthanizing the abandoned animals. This was done to prevent the spread of radioactive contamination through animals moving in and out of the exclusion zone. Soldiers were ordered to shoot dogs, cats, and other animals they encountered. This was often a deeply traumatic task for those involved. Some reports suggest that efforts were made to make the process humane, but the circumstances were grim and chaotic. Livestock in surrounding rural areas were also culled to prevent radioactive contamination from spreading via milk, meat, or movement.
Wow.
Yeah. Despite the culling efforts, some animals survived and began forming feral populations. These animals adapted to life in the exclusion zone, and their descendants can still be found there today. Wolves, dogs, and other animals. Over time, feral dogs and wolves established territories within the zone. and many are direct descendants of pets left behind in 1986. Today, the Chernobyl exclusion zone is now home to several hundred feral dogs. They live near the power plant and in the abandoned villages, surviving on scraps from workers, tourists, and natural resources.
The pictures of it now, ironically, are very beautiful because a lot of the buildings and stuff have been overgrown with like trees and whatnot. And, obviously, this was a horrible accident, and, it shouldn't be like, let's look at the bright side. But there's a bunch of very beautiful pictures of what is now the location of Chernobyl with, trees and stuff growing through the apartment buildings and stuff. And there's just something to me that I love seeing nature kind of overtake big buildings, I guess, because we as humans are kind of dicks to the environment. So it's a really beautiful, almost apocalyptic look, but it's kind of beautiful at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
This is a picture. I'll describe it. It's a picture of Chernobyl, but there's like vines and trees going in between all of the buildings around the site. And like even in some of the buildings you have trees growing inside of the buildings, and it looks like a zombie ghost town.
Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting because it says here that like the local wildlife and all of that are thriving because
Oh
there's
yeah.
no human interference there.
Yeah, I mean, wildlife almost always flourishes without any human intervention. We, like, as humans, we kind of destroy some very beautiful things, and it's unfortunate. But, that's just the society we live in. We live in a very greedy, capitalistic society where we just kind of take what we want. But,
Mm-hmm.
like, some of the animals, while they look a little messed up, are also kind of beautiful in their own way because you can tell that they've been through it.
Yeah.
Like there's pictures. If you look up Chernobyl animal mutations, you'll see like there's a picture of a cow with half of its mouth. Basically, they just have these genetic disformities, I guess you would call them, or deformities. And they, like, you can kind of tell what most of them are, but you can also see that something's not necessarily right.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see any fish mutations though, quite yet. Oh, yeah, I do. I found a mutant catfish.
Hey yo.
Oh, they're just gigantic. Oh my god. In Chernobyl's cooling pond, there's a catfish the size of like a 6-foot man.
Whoa.
So this catfish is just really huge, and it's like almost the size of an alligator. It's terrifying.
I think catfish can get that big though.
Can they? That's really big. I didn't know that they could get that big.
There's one
Uh,
catfish that was caught that's like 9 feet long.
Interesting. So maybe it's not that big. It looks huge though. I've also been at fishing a total of I think 3 times.
No, that's
So
that's valid. The 9 foot long catfish was found in Thailand.
it was found in Thailand.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
I think that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's so crazy. I want more pictures of Chernobyl. I want to see more of it because holy, there's so much history, right? Like all of these people had lives. They were removed from their homes. You can't go back. Well, I guess you can go back, but you can't live there. All of these, like, wildlife is flourishing aside from the mutations and whatnot. That's just crazy.
Yeah.
It's actually bonkers. Like, could you imagine, right? You know what like a pig looks like. You know what a dog looks like. Maybe you know what fish look like, unlike me. And then you're like, let's take a trip to Chernobyl, right? And you go on one of these tours. They're like, here you see the three-legged moose, and you're like,
Yeah.
excuse me, the what? And then he looks at you like Donkey from Shrek, and you
Hmm.
can't do anything about that. You can't. You pass by these fish, and they're like trying to swim in two different directions because they have two butt ends and two pairs of fins, and they just go in a circle. And you're like, how do they live? How does this happen? What's going on? There's just so many things in nature. Like, I wonder if those trees are like genetically different than other trees in the area. I don't know. There's just so many strange things that happen with radiation. Also, please don't ever go here and just like drink out of the pond. There was a guy that drank out of the pond. Well, okay, I don't know if this is a real story, but there was a guy that drank out of the pond and apparently he went blind.
Whoa, whoa, what?
I don't know anything about radioactivity to say that doesn't make sense because it sounds like radioactivity could do a lot of things to the body. But yeah, I think it could have been something in the water too maybe. But yeah, he drank from the water and then like over a span of it says 3 months, he went almost fully blind.
Whoa,
So please don't drink the water there.
that's crazy. So, when people refer to Chernobyl, I feel like this is like the most common thing that people know about is that there's this thing called the elephant's foot. And so, what that is, beneath the reactor, a highly radioactive mass of melted nuclear fuel, reactor core, and sand formed a structure known as the elephant's foot. It was so radioactive in 1986 that standing near it for just a few minutes would cause death. Over
What?
time, its radiation has decreased significantly, but it still remains highly dangerous. Early photographs of the elephant's foot were taken by placing a camera on a wheeled cart and pushing it into the room, as direct exposure was lethal. To dive a little bit more into what the elephant's foot is, it's a mass of corium, which is a highly radioactive mixture of nuclear fuel, uranium dioxide, control rod materials, sand, and concrete all melted together. And it was formed when the reactor core melted down. The extreme heat caused the fuel and other materials to flow like lava and then solidify into the now infamous structure.
Holy.
Yeah. Immediately after it formed, it emitted around 10,000 roentgens per hour, and that's enough to kill someone standing near it within 30 seconds to a few minutes. In the 1990s, the radiation levels dropped to about 1,000 roentgens per hour due to natural decay of the short-lived radioactive isotopes. Today ish, the elephant's foot now emits approximately 10 roentgens per hour, though the estimates vary slightly depending on the measurement technique and how close you are to it. This is still dangerous for prolonged exposure. 1 hour of exposure likely causes radiation sickness, and 5 hours of exposure is lethal without immediate medical intervention.
Holy cow. So you're telling me it's not an actual elephant's foot?
No. So it's still dangerous because many of the most radioactive isotopes have decayed, but the long lived isotopes like cesium 137 and strontium 90 still emit significant radiation. It's also dangerous because it's physically unstable. It's brittle and slowly breaking apart, so this could release radioactive dust if disturbed. It no longer generates significant heat, but its components are still radioactive and hazardous if particles are inhaled or ingested.
Ingested? Like consumed?
Yeah. Or yeah, consumed, I guess.
Well, I was just saying, like, that's why would anyone please don't consume anything near Chernobyl, please.
Literally. It's not smart. Don't do it.
Even if the guy on the street says it's safe, it's probably not.
Yeah, most likely not.
Wow, we do a lot of really light-hearted topics.
Yeah.
This is actually devastating.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I wonder, again, I bring this up almost every time, but I want a time machine and to view Chernobyl from a distance and just kind of like watch it happen. Is that like, would you consider that messed up or just like curious?
I mean, it would be interesting.
Like, obviously we know what happened, but I want to see like, I don't want to see people's skin like incinerate off, but I want to see what does it actually look like when it's happening. What
Hmm.
is that? Is that just a pile of goop?
That's the elephant's foot.
What?
Yeah.
That's insane. That looks like the goop that turned the Ninja Turtles into humanoids. Oh my gosh. Is that a plunger next to it? What is that? That's a crazy good looking picture. Is that recent?
I think so, yeah.
Wow. So that's where it like bubbled up. What the friggin' frick?
Yeah.
That's crazy. Oh my god.
Um,
It completely molded the terrain into whatever the fuck it wanted to.
yeah.
It literally said concrete, hardly newer, and turned it into a fucking bubble. Whoa. Wow. Yeah, so moral of the story, don't go into a melting down nuclear reactor. What I got
Yeah.
from this.
Yeah.
Or live near one. If you're buying a house or moving somewhere, make sure that there's not one near you.
Yeah. And sign petitions if they're trying to build one near you.
Yeah, be like, I absolutely do not want that. You're gonna tank my property value. I was seeing there are books from like schools and stuff and people's homes in the like radiation site. I would love a Chernobyl book.
Oh,
I
yeah?
think that would be a kind of cool piece to have like a conversation about.
I feel like it would still be kind of radioactive, maybe.
Is there a way to make it not?
Um, I don't know.
Like, have we figured out how to do that yet? Hold on, let's ask Google.
Clean it, maybe.
Heavily contaminated objects are decontaminated using strong chemicals such as nitric acid and permanganate. Permanganate? What is permanganate? That sounds like pomegranate, but permanent. Permanent pomegranate? Oh, permanganate. Oh, permanganate. It's basically a compound with manganate ion. What? So these are like high level chemicals that help dissolve bad things.
Yes.
You can remove radioactive materials if they are on your body or someone else's body by self decontamination, but simply washing your hands or parts of your body that were covered will not work. No kidding. You're telling me I can't just go wash my hands with some dish soap or something?
I bet Dawn would work. Dawn works on everything.
Bro, just get the Mr. Clean Magic eraser. It erases anything. You're telling me it can't erase some radiation?
That's crazy. So, okay, an interesting fact that I found is they built basically a concrete sarcophagus over reactor 4. After they kind of got everything cleaned up, they just built basically a concrete box around it. But by the 1990s, it was deteriorating and at risk of collapse. So they built one in 2016 and they called it something like the new safe confinement. It was a massive steel arch that is designed to last 100 years and prevent further radioactive leaks.
Oh.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of wild. So I found the true death toll, even though it's kind of like still unknown. Official Soviet reports stated that only 31 people died directly from the explosion and acute radiation syndrome. However, estimates of the long term death toll vary widely from 4,000 to 90,000 plus people due to radiation related cancers and other illnesses. So, for sure, 31 people died, but it could be anywhere from 4,000 to 90,000 to 100,000 people that died from radiation illnesses. That's crazy. I mean, it's hard to really pinpoint down because you can get cancer for anything. So I found another cute little fact. The Soviet government initially tried to cover up the disaster. It wasn't until radiation alarms went off at a nuclear power plant in Sweden, nearly 1,000 kilometers away, that the world became aware of the incident. Swedish officials traced the radiation back to the Soviet Union, forcing them to admit the explosion. I also, in one of the videos that I watched on this subject, they talked about how they disabled the phone lines before evacuation. Like, once the officials found out about it, they disabled the phone lines in the whole town so nobody could call out and spread misinformation. I thought that was low key fucked up.
That is fucked up. But I think that I guess nowadays that would be a little more like really crazy. But back then you have to think the way that the news worked, you didn't have like all of this technology that we have now. I mean, not that they were like in dinosaur age or anything, but like information didn't spread as quick as it does now.
Yeah.
So they were probably just trying to prevent news to falsely spread. But now everyone would just, hey, nuclear reactors melting down. Instead of running away, let's pull our phones out and record it. It's just such a different time.
Mm-hmm. Whoa. So there was this one like fact that I found. Contaminated materials from the disaster were scattered widely. Some radioactive debris was unknowingly recycled into building materials, and traces of Chernobyl's radiation were found as far as North America. And so I
They
started
found
looking,
traces in North America?
yeah. So I started looking into it a
Whoa.
little bit more. And of course, the winds and water and weather, that's kind of like unfortunately unavoidable. The winds carried radioactive particles across Europe and beyond. The fallout detected as far as North America and Asia. Sweden, Finland, and Germany were among the first countries to detect unusually high radiation levels shortly after the disaster. Rain and snow deposited radioactive materials into soil, lakes, and rivers across Europe, contaminating the food chain for decades. That's
Holy.
crazy. So I looked up what it meant for North America. Monitoring stations in the United States and Canada detected small amounts of iodine 131, cesium 134, and cesium 137 in the atmosphere. These isotopes were carried by high altitude winds across the Atlantic Ocean and deposited in North America via rain and atmospheric settling. Radioactive particles were found in higher concentrations in areas that experienced significant rainfall in the weeks following the disaster. For example, parts of northeastern United States, including New York and New England, some regions in Canada, particularly Ontario and Quebec. These particles settled into soil, rivers, and lakes, leading to localized but very low levels of contamination. That's wild.
That is very crazy. So, we once again have found another terrifying topic.
Yeah.
I just want to understand like how radiation works on like a molecular level someday. What to what extent can it change something's genetic makeup? Like could you imagine if fish started walking on land or something
That would be crazy.
and like starts talking to the dogs? Like blub blub blub, woof 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 blub blub. And now they're like homies?
They're BFFs. So I looked up what you were asking, but I couldn't tell you what any of this fucking means because I'm not crazy into like if I read it, you probably wouldn't really understand it either because it's like talking about nucleotides and weird shit.
I don't know anything about nucleotides.
I don't either.
Other than I think they're like okay, well obviously they have to do with nucleic acid, like DNA, RNA, and they're made
Probably.
up of three different things that I don't remember. It's like sugar and phosphate and something else. And that's all I got. I guess I knew a little more than I thought, but that's still probably nothing.
So here
Wait,
is what I'm
no.
getting from like simplistic, like super duper explain it to me like I'm 5 years old terms.
Isn't before you do that, I actually think it's like the different bases in DNA. I think that's the ACGT thing that I did in like chemistry or something.
Are
It's
you
like a
talking about
denene.
nucleotides still?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know.
Nucleotides are the tiny building blocks that make up DNA and RNA, which are the molecules carrying the instructions for how living things grow and work. Think of
Eh,
nucleotides like the individual beads in a necklace. They are small pieces that, when strung together in a specific order, create something much bigger and more important. But, so the question
ah.
that you were initially asking about radiation and how much is enough to change, like, DNA, Basically, you have to get hit with a lot of radiation, like being close to a big explosion. Imagine a Lego wall getting smashed by a
Okay.
hammer. Your body might not be able to
Okay.
fix it, but that's when the instructions in your DNA can change and your body might not work the same anymore. And here's what happens if
Mm.
your DNA changes. Your body might still work fine because it's good at fixing small problems, but if the instructions get messed up a lot, your body might grow things the wrong way, like getting sick or passing on broken instructions to your kids. Like if they're Lego blocks and you give the Lego blocks to your kid, but you lose the instructions.
Thank God for things being able to be explained to us like we're 5 years old.
Yeah. So those animals would have to be like basically right next to the explosion, which they kind of were, in order for that to take place. But then I think the like developing multiple heads and legs and shit, that comes from, I don't think that comes directly, like that's a byproduct of like, oh, I'm exposed to a lot of radiation right now. I may grow another arm. I think that would be more so exposed like if those animals were to have a kid.
Mm.
So the animals would
Yeah.
mate, have a kid, and then their kid would have another leg or a head or something like that. It would be in the form of like defects rather than direct exposure, tying in with evolution as well.
That's crazy. This is bonkers.
Mm-hmm.
Radioactivity is something you don't want to fuck with. So, if you go to Chernobyl, do not drink the water. But you can at us at Midnight Oil Entertainment on Instagram using the hashtag NoblePod or ChairPod with an E
Share.
or Midnight Chernobyl. But that's all I got. Yeah, I am significantly more terrified of radiation now because originally I thought it was just like whatever. I thought movies and media just make it like really scary and it's like you'll turn into like the Incredible Hulk or something. But
Mm-hmm.
no, you don't get any superpowers. You just like become blind and incinerate. So
Yeah.
I don't recommend it.
No, not at all.
Not on my. You know what? Keep a running list of Keegan's health benefits. And in the do not section, put in consume radiation or be around it. Those are likely not fantastic for you.
The sun
So,
actually provides radiation, so
oh yeah, that's why up until the age of like 16, 15, something like that, I only wore sweatpants and long sleeve shirts and hats. Not because of radiation, I just didn't like the sun touching me.
fair enough, I
I
guess.
would, I would, but now I'm like, I don't care. I even wear shorts now. It's a very big improvement. But I've learned the effects of the sun. So, like, I try not to go out in long exposures of the sun, unless it's sunrise or sunset.
I just wear sunblock.
Yeah, I mean, that also works. You could do I guess you could do that. I do go like, I still go out and run, but it's usually, like, turning nighttime or turning daytime. Usually early in the morning or late at night.
Fair enough.
But, yes, you can also use sunblock. Hashtag don't get radiated.
Yeah.
Hashtag not rad.
Not rad.
Hashtag not rad.
That's
That's
funny.
all I got.
Yeah. Well, also go check out our Patreon because there's gonna be a lot of uncut footage going in there from this podcast. You can find our Patreon at the Midnight Oil Podcast, and there should be a link like in our description on whatever you're listening on. And speaking of Patreon, we gotta do our Patreon shoutouts. Our very first member was Zaid. You can find him on twitch.tv/agrode. Our second one was Dakota, and that's Keeg's partner. So huge shout outs and huge thank yous to both of them. They're carrying us right now.
That's right. And I'll also put in, if you've made it thus far and you want some experience in the podcasting field, the content creation field, anything along those lines, you want to do audio or video stuff, hit us up. We're looking for editors so we can get more content out for you guys and start actually growing, because right now we just kind of throw shit at the wall hoping it sticks, and we want to do more. We want to do more than the podcast, and Tab works like a dog, so if you'd like to work like a dog too, hit us up. And yeah, that's all I got. I guess we're gonna see you guys on Wednesday.
Yeah. Good night.
Nighties.